Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I'm going to return to the adaptation of the board or card game Mini Rogue, which I'm working on, and specifically to this layout of cards. And I promised in a previous video that I was going to explain how I got this staggered effect, where you have one card, say this card here, which sort of overlaps these two, and then you have another one in the center, and then these two are, two to a column again. So I have previously discussed tables, HTML tables. Tables are a way to set up a grid, and the grid is divided into cells, which are squares or rectangles, and the table can be any number of squares wide that you want, and it can be any number of squares high that you want, and you go through and specify what's in each cell. So it can be text, or it can be a picture or pictures, or it can be a combination of text and pictures, or it can be other elements as well. And because it's a grid, it's a good way to have layout where you make sure that everything is lined up in the way that you want it to be lined up. In fact, this layout here, you can see how all of the semicolons are lined up. Well, that's done with a HTML table. So you might have sort of guessed, well, this is probably some sort of table like that. And if you did guess that, you'd be correct. But how did they get if it's all cells, why is this picture not up here or down here? Why isn't it lined up with the other cells? And similarly, why isn't this picture either up here or down here? And the answer to that is that there are a couple of things you can add into a table called Colspan and Rowspan that sort of combine some of the cells. You can make a particular cell several normal cells wide, or you can make it several normal cells high, or you can actually do both and make it sort of a big square and have little cells below and above and to the side of it. And that's how I've done this. And I want to show you by way of a slightly more complicated example, because I said there's two commands, Colspan and Rowspan, and I've actually only used one of them in this layout, which is actually quite simple. So I want to have a more complicated example so I can teach you sort of both of them at the same time. So let's have a look at the code, and I'll try and have the code and the and the output on screen at the same time for this. So I have I've made a little program to demonstrate Colspan and Rowspan. I've put that in the zip file, which you can download from itch.io from the link which is in the description. And before I start on the main thing I want to tell you about, you might have noticed that there's a difference between this table and this table, when there's several, but you might have noticed the specific difference that the lines of the borders of the cells are visible. In this one, though it is a table, you can't see any of the lines. I didn't have to do anything to make the lines invisible. In Twine, that's just the default. I had to do something specific to make the lines visible. And before we get on to the main bit, I'll tell you what that is. You go into Style Sheet, and you say TD, which means every cell in a HTML table should have whatever is in between the two curly brackets. In this case, there's only one thing inside the curly brackets, the curly bracket and the sort of end curly bracket there. And that is border, B-O-R-D-E-R, colon, space, 3px, which means 3 pixels, solid white, and then semicolon. And that means exactly what it says, actually. It means that every cell of a HTML table that is in this program will have a border which is 3 pixels thick and solid white. And if I wanted to make that thicker or thinner, I'd just change that number, but 3 is fine. So that's how we do that. Anyway, on to the main lesson. So an HTML table usually involves a lot of code. As you can see, that's a fairly small, output, but there's quite a lot of lines, quite a lot of different commands to make that happen. There's a lot of code, but it's quite simple code. And I'll go through it again. I have gone through this before, but I'll go through it again so that the rest of what I have to say is a bit more straightforward. You have, or a bit easier to follow, sorry. So you have, the first thing you need to do is you have this less than, table, greater than, and that indicates, right, this is the start of a table. And then at the end of the table, you have greater than slash table greater than, and that indicates, right, it's the end of the table now. And that format is quite common, and in fact it also, it's common to a lot of HTML, which is the language that is the sort of basic language used for laying out websites. And it's also used for the individual elements of the table. So when we want to start a row, which is the first thing we need to do, we go to tr, and then at the end of the row we have to have a slash tr, and that means start a new row. And then in each row we have td and slash td, and that means start a new cell. And then within the cell we put whatever we want, which could be a bit of text, it could be a call to a particular image, whatever it may be. We have a cell, and then we might want another cell, and then we might want another cell after that. We can have as many cells as we want, but eventually we'll run out of, we'll have as much cells as we want, and so we'll put tr, meaning, right, that's the end of the row. Then we might start another row, and we might start yet another cell, and have slash td, and so on, and then eventually we'll finish that row. We might have yet another row, but anyway, eventually we'll have done all the rows, and then we just do the, oops, I've gone too far. Then we just do the slash table. So there can be sort of quite a lot, but it's not very complex. So how do we have those bigger cells? Well, we do that with Colspan and Rowspan. Colspan means this cell should span more than one column. In other words, it should be wider than normal. And Rowspan means this cell should span more than one row, meaning it should be taller than normal. So let's say we start our table, we start our row, and then we have this one, td rowspan equals quote to quote. Note that even though it's a numeric value, it's in quotes. Don't know why it has to be in quotes, but it does. So that cell there is this one. The command is saying start a cell. The td rowspan equals 2 means start a cell, but I want it to be twice as tall as normal. Now we're not limited to 2. I've said that the rowspan equals 2, but that could have been 3 or 4 or 5 or however many we need. In this particular case, I just happen to only be using 2. And rowspan goes to the right. It means, Colspan goes to the right and cellspan goes down. So rowspan equals 2 means sort of take over the cell immediately below you. Make the cell below you part of this cell. And Colspan equals 2 means make the cell to your right part of this cell. So you can see on that first row, and the first row is this cell, then this cell, then this cell. This cell is actually part of the second row. So we have this cell, then this cell, then this cell. Oops. Do it again. This cell, then this cell, then this cell. And I'll show you the code for that row. So we have the TD, I've already shown you that one, that's the leftmost cell. Then we have just a normal cell, so it's just TD, normal cell, /TD. And then we have TD Colspan equals quote to quote, Rowspan equals quote to quote. So that cell is sort of 4 times as big as a normal cell. It is too wide and too tall. So you can make the cells as big as you want. If I wanted it to be cover 6 cells, I could do that, and so on. And that is the end of the row. And then we have another row, the second row. So we start a TR. There's only one cell in this row because the cell to its left, well, that's been taken over by this one, and the 2 cells to its right, well, that's been taken over by this one. So this row only has one cell in it, and secondly, even though it's the first cell in the row, it's in the second column because the first column is taken over by this cell. So when you start using Colspan and Rowspan, there can be a difference between the resulting layout and how the code works. Like the first, in this case, the first cell in the row is in the second column and there's only one cell in the row. Things can get a bit sort of non-instinctive, I suppose. You can see that in this row, we've got TR, TD, only one cell in this row, /TD, /TR. So if you're going to be using Colspan and Rowspan, especially if you're using lots of different cells that have it, you might want to get a bit of paper and sort of draw the cell, and then over that draw the cells that you want to combine to make sure that everything lines up in the way that you want it to. You might want to do that before you do the code, and because if you don't, you might find that it's a bit hard to get things where you want them, and you might find that you have one row that has too many cells or too few, or you might find that things that you thought were all going to be lined up in the same column actually aren't. One of them shifted to the right because you've counted wrong or something like that. It can be a bit uninstinctive. And I won't go through the rest of the code too much. This row is sort of normal, it just has 4 normal cells, and then we have a final row that's got an example of Colspan, so it only has 3 cells in the row. So I'll just quickly go through the code for that. We have the TR there, and then we have this. We have these normal cells, and we just have that 4 times. Then we end the row, and then we start the final row, and we have two normal cells, and then we have this cell that is 2 cells wide. So that's a sort of more complicated example of Colspan and Rowspan, and I wanted to do that because if I just used this, I wouldn't have been able to explain both Colspan and Rowspan visually. And it would have been, hopefully, I've made it a bit easier. So now that we've explored all that, let's look at this example. Well, you probably, if you've taken all that in, you'd probably say, oh, well, this is an example, probably an example of Rowspan, and this is probably an example of Rowspan, and then these 4 are probably just normal cells. And if that's what you guessed, then congratulations, you're absolutely right. Now, there are some examples of layout not being exactly where you'd think they were. This card here is the first cell in the second row, and this card here is the second cell in the second row, but they're not in the first or second column. They're in the second and fourth column, because the first row is this one, this one, this one, and this one, and then the second row is just this one and this one. So I'll show you what I mean by getting into the code. So we have, and again, let's zoom in. We have div align equals center, which just means start a paragraph that's centered on the page. And then we have the slash div at the bottom to end that paragraph. We have the table, and then we have the slash table. We have tr, td rowspan equals 2. I've sort of explained what this means in more detail, but basically this just means print card number 1. Print whatever card is in position number 1, which is this one here, the sort of weird plant looking thing. And then we have print card number 2. Then we have rowspan equals 2 and print card number 4, not card number 3, because I'm conceiving of it as this is card number 1, this is card number 2, this is card number 3, and this is card number 4. So the first row has card 1, card 2, and card 4. Not card 1, card 1. Not card 1, card 2, and card 3. Card 4, and then we have a normal cell printing card 5. This code doesn't come up on this particular screen. The way the game works is you make your way through one spread of the cards, and then you sort of start again, and then you make it through, and then you start again, and you keep going until you either finish all of the areas or you've been killed, a set number of areas, or you've been killed. And at particular stages, there's an extra card over here. So that code, this code here, doesn't come up in the first, at the start of the game. This condition is not met. So that's just displaying an extra card at the end in particular areas. And then we have the second row where we print card 3, and again, as you can see, it's the first cell in the row, but it's not in the first column, it's in the second column. And then we print card number 6, and again, that's the second cell in the row, but it is in the that's the wrong one, it's in this column. Yeah, the second row is this one and this one. So it's in the first cell in the row is in the second column, and the second cell in the row is in the fourth column. So as I say, things can get a bit unintuitive when you're working with Colspan and or Rowspan. So you may want to draw a diagram, or perhaps you find it easier than I do. I certainly sometimes find it easier to do it on paper. So that is how we get this effect, this staggered effect that we need to play the game. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.